In 19th century America, work occupied the silent center of daily life. Before the rise of large corporations and mass urbanization, most of the population lived in small communities where subsistence depended on direct effort, daily repetition, and knowledge passed down through generations. Mornings began early, guided by natural light and the rhythm of the seasons. Men, women, and children shared tasks according to the needs of the home, not as an exception, but as a widely accepted social rule. In this environment, work was not only a means of income, but a form of belonging and stability. The first Adventists emerged within this common landscape of rural and semi-urban America. There was no separate or exclusive economic model among them. They were farmers who tended the land using traditional methods, artisans who mastered manual crafts, teachers in local schools, seamstresses, carpenters, printers, and small-scale merchants. Most lived in simple houses, often attached to their workplaces, where the boundary between domestic life and productive activity was almost non-existent. Their livelihood came from constant effort, not from future expectations. In the agricultural regions of the American Northeast and Midwest, Adventists worked the land like their neighbors. They planted corn, wheat, and oats, tended orchards, and raised animals for their own consumption and local sale. Agricultural work required continuous presence, attention to the climate and soil fertility. There was no advanced mechanization. Animal-drawn plows, manual harvesting, and storage in barns were part of the routine. Profits were modest, often reinvested in the property itself or used to support the family during the winter months. In villages and small towns, work took other forms. Carpentry workshops produced furniture and basic utensils. Tailors made bespoke clothing. Blacksmiths met essential community needs, from horseshoes to agricultural tools. Adventists involved in these trades were not outwardly different. They participated in the same commercial networks, negotiated with the same suppliers, and faced the same economic difficulties as their contemporaries. Religious identity did not replace the need for professional competence. As the movement grew, some activities began to focus on publishing. Printing newspapers, pamphlets, and books required skilled labor. Typesetters, bookbinders, and press operators found work in workshops connected to the nascent Seventh-day Adventist Church, especially in the city of Battle Creek. Even so, these workers received wages similar to those in the local market. The work environment followed the industrial standards of the time, with long hours, repetitive tasks, and remuneration adjusted to productivity. Adventist women played a significant economic role. Many worked as teachers in public or private schools, a respected and relatively stable position. Others worked as nurses, midwives, or caregivers, occupations that grew as communities expanded. At home, the production of food, clothing, and household items also had direct economic value, reducing expenses and, in some cases, generating income through the sale of surplus. This work rarely appeared in official records, but it sustained the financial stability of families. Some Adventists opted for itinerant commerce. They traveled between cities offering books, household goods, or agricultural products. This type of activity required physical stamina, negotiation skills, and a willingness to spend long periods away from home. The roads were uneven, the distances great, and the risks constant. Still, it represented a viable alternative in an economy where money circulated slowly and credit was limited. Personal records and letters from the period, including those of Ellen G. White, describe a constant concern with the balance between work and livelihood. Financial difficulties were treated as a normal part of life. There is no idealization of poverty in these documents, nor any expectation of quick prosperity. The tone is practical, attentive to accounts, harvests, printing costs, and the immediate needs of families. Adventist work in early America did not form an isolated system. It fit into the larger gears of the local and regional economy, reflecting the limitations and possibilities of the time. What distinguished these workers was not the occupation itself, but the way they organized their daily priorities within a gradually transforming world, preparing the ground for changes that would become more visible in the following decades. As the 19th century progressed, the American economy underwent gradual transformations, perceptible even in smaller communities. The growth of railroads, the expansion of regional markets, and the emergence of medium-sized urban centers slowly altered how work was organized and remunerated. Adventists embedded in this same social fabric observed these changes practically, adapting as new livelihood possibilities arose, without abruptly breaking with previous models. Wage labor became more common among young Adventists who left rural properties in search of opportunities in the cities. Food factories, mills, machine shops, and railroad companies absorbed a growing workforce. Workdays were long, often exceeding 10 hours, and wages were limited. Still, they represented a more predictable source of income than climate-dependent agriculture. Contemporary records indicate that many accepted these conditions as a temporary phase, saving to return to the countryside or start their own small businesses. The education sector offered another means of livelihood. Schools linked to Adventist communities began to emerge modestly, often in simple buildings similar to the public schools of the time. Teachers received low salaries and held multiple positions, teaching various subjects to students of varying ages. The work demanded discipline and consistency, as well as adaptation to curricula still under development. Even so, education became a relatively stable field of work, especially for single or widowed women. In local commerce, Adventists managed grocery stores, warehouses, and small hardware stores. These establishments functioned as community meeting points, where news circulated along with goods. Profit depended on credit granted to customers, often recorded in notebooks and paid only after the harvest. Default was a constant risk, and many merchants maintained minimal margins to survive. Personal trust, more than formal contracts, sustained these economic relationships. Publishing activity continued to expand. The production of periodicals required not only typesetters, but also proofreaders, distributors, and administrators. The Review and Herald newspaper, for example, employed workers who dealt with tight deadlines and increasing print runs. Pay was regular but modest, and the work demanded manual precision and constant attention. The circulation of printed material also generated indirect jobs, such as transportation and door-to-door sales. Some Adventists found sustenance in the nascent healthcare sector, still far from modern medicine. Simple institutions offered basic care, controlled meals, and rest. Workers served as cooks, assistants, gardeners, and administrators. These roles did not require advanced training, but discipline and regularity. In some cases, the salary was supplemented by housing and food, reducing personal expenses. This model attracted entire families, who saw in it a form of relative stability. Women's work remained diverse. Besides teaching and healthcare, many women sewed for others, washed clothes, or produced food for sale. In urban areas, some worked in textile factories, facing harsh conditions and lower pay than men. Despite this, their financial contribution was essential to the household budget. Letters and diaries from the period show constant concern with balancing expenses and income, reflecting a carefully managed domestic economy. Children and adolescents also participated in the economic effort. Working early was common and socially accepted. Boys helped on farms, in workshops, or as apprentices in trades. Girls helped at home or in light paid work. Schooling, when possible, was interspersed with these activities. For Adventist families, this reality did not differ significantly from the general American pattern, revealing a complete integration into the social context of the period. Geographic mobility was increasing. The advancement of railroads allowed workers to move in search of better wages. Adventists followed this movement, relocating to growing regions in the American Midwest or West. These changes required difficult decisions, the sale of property, and the rebuilding of social networks. Work once again guided these choices, functioning as the organizing axis of daily life. By the end of the century, the economic profile of Adventists reflected a combination of tradition and adaptation. They remained present in agriculture and manual trades, but increasingly participated in wage labor, education, and institutional production. This transition occurred gradually, without evident rupture, preparing the stage for new forms of work organization that would consolidate at the beginning of the following century. At the turn of the 19th and the 20th centuries, Adventist work began to organize itself more visibly, following the gradual formalization of American institutions. Daily life, still marked by simple routines, began to incorporate fixed schedules, more rigorous accounting records, and a clear division of labor. For many, this change did not mean immediate advancement, but a silent adaptation to a world in which work ceased to be merely familial or artisanal and began to integrate larger structures. Healthcare institutions became important employers. Sanitary facilities and treatment centers, though still modest, served as stable workplaces for cooks, laundresses, nursing assistants, gardeners, and administrators. The tasks were repetitive and demanded daily discipline. Pay was rarely high, but it came with a degree of predictability. For workers accustomed to the uncertainty of harvests or seasonal trade, this regularity represented security. Many lived on the premises, reducing expenses and strengthening community ties. Education was also becoming a source of income. Schools and colleges linked to the Adventist community maintained simple structures, but required teachers with basic training, secretaries, librarians, and maintenance staff. Salaries remained modest, and often part of the remuneration came in the form of housing or food. Life on these campuses was marked by predictable routines where work and social interaction were almost inevitably intertwined. Institutional growth brought with it the need for administration. Offices began employing accountants, clerks, and secretaries. Office work, still new to many Adventists, demanded precision, organization, and attention to detail. Ledgers, correspondence, and reports occupied long hours of the day. These workers rarely appeared in public records, but they sustained the daily operations of expanding organizations. Compensation followed local standards and reflected the regional economy. At the same time, many Adventists remained connected to the land. Agricultural properties associated with schools and health institutions produced food for internal consumption and sale. Rural workers tended to vegetable gardens, orchards, and livestock, integrating agricultural work into the institutional structure. This model reduced costs and maintained a direct link to traditional practices. For families involved in this type of work, the day began early and ended at sunset, following ancient rhythms in a new organizational context. The trade in books and periodicals was expanding. Salespeople traveled by road and rail, offering publications in small towns and rural areas. This work demanded physical stamina, adaptability, and a willingness to spend long periods away from home. Income varied according to the region and local receptiveness. Some were able to support entire families. Others supplemented their earnings with seasonal work. Uncertainty was part of this activity, as was the constant need for financial planning. Women continued to play a central role in the Adventist economy. In addition to their established roles, many assumed administrative positions, especially in educational and health institutions. Others remained in extended domestic work, producing food, clothing, and services that sustained not only their homes but entire communities. The invisible economy of the home remained essential, even as formal work gained prominence. Letters and personal records from the time, including notes by Ellen G. White, reveal practical concerns about salaries, debts, and operating costs. The references are direct, without idealization. They speak of late payments, unexpected expenses, and difficult decisions about where to invest limited resources. These documents show a community attentive to economic reality, aware of its limitations, and cautious in its choices. Technological advancements were beginning to alter certain routines. More efficient printing machines, improved transportation systems, and standardized administrative methods increased productivity. Still, the impact was gradual. Work continued to demand intense human effort, and most profits were reinvested in maintaining the institutions themselves. Growth was controlled, reflecting a conservative stance towards financial risks. In daily life, these transformations were felt almost imperceptibly. More rigid schedules, monthly salaries, written reports, and defined hierarchies became part of daily life. For working Adventists, this meant learning new forms of organization without completely abandoning old practices. Work remained the central axis of existence, shaping choices, commutes, and expectations. As the century progressed toward an even more complex scenario. At the beginning of the 20th century, Adventist work was already fully integrated into a rapidly transforming America. The daily lives of families reflected a combination of habits inherited from the previous century and new demands imposed by increasing industrialization. Mornings continued to begin early, but now marked by clocks, factory whistles, and fixed schedules. Work ceased to be merely an extension of domestic life and took on more defined contours with contracts, monthly salaries, and clearer institutional expectations. For many Adventists, livelihood came from wage labor in urban environments. Food factories, printing presses, warehouses, and workshops employed men and women in repetitive tasks with little room for rapid advancement. The security of a fixed salary compensated for the loss of autonomy that previously existed in agricultural or artisanal work. This stability allowed for basic financial planning, rent payments, and the gradual acquisition of household goods. Even so, vulnerability remained as layoffs and economic crises affected workers immediately. In small towns, commerce remained an important source of income. General stores, pharmacies, tailor shops, and hardware stores remained family-run businesses. The owner worked alongside relatives, managing inventory, serving customers, and negotiating credit. Profits were limited and depended on the economic health of the local community. Adventists in this sector faced the same pressures as other merchants, adjusting prices, reducing expenses, and dealing with periods of low monetary circulation. Agriculture did not disappear from the economic landscape. Many families maintained small holdings, even when some members worked outside the home. Producing food for their own consumption reduced expenses and offered security during times of uncertainty. Work in the fields remained demanding, with little mechanization and a strong dependence on the weather. Agricultural income was supplementary, but essential for the survival of numerous households. Institutional work remained relevant. Schools, publishing houses, and health centers employed a significant portion of the Adventist workforce. These environments offered a degree of predictability, but also required compliance with administrative norms and internal hierarchies. Employees dealt with reports, operational goals, and cost control. Daily life was marked by discipline and routine, reflecting a work model increasingly aligned with the general American standard. Booksellers and colporteurs remained present, traveling through rural and urban areas. The work was solitary and physically exhausting, but it allowed for some flexibility. Income varied, requiring strict control of expenses. Many carefully recorded gains and losses in personal notebooks, a common practice at a time when financial security was fragile. This type of work connected different regions and maintained economic ties between distant communities. Women, now more visible in the formal labor market, worked as teachers, nurses, secretaries, and factory workers. Despite lower salaries, their contribution was fundamental to the family's financial stability. Domestic work continued to accumulate, prolonging the daily workday. Young people faced choices similar to those of other Americans of their generation. Some remained on family farms, while others migrated to cities in search of work. The decision was guided by economic necessity, not idealism. That idealism was a must. Idealism. Work shaped trajectories, determined displacements, and influenced the formation of new families. Social mobility was limited, but possible through careful saving and continuous effort. Personal documents, administrative minutes, and accounting records show a community attentive to material realities. Ellen G. White appears in these records as an observer of her time, mentioning costs, wages, and practical difficulties faced by ordinary workers. The tone is direct, reflecting a clear awareness of economic limitations and the need for prudence. Observing how Adventists worked and earned a living in early America, what emerges is not a separate model, but a constant adaptation to the conditions of the time. Work was simple, demanding, and more often than not, sufficient only to maintain stability. Integrated into the larger flow of American society, these men and women organized their existence around daily toil, preparing themselves, often without realizing it, for the even greater economic challenges that the new century would bring. Throughout this historical journey, Adventist work in early America reveals less a system of its own and more a faithful portrait of ordinary men and women embedded in their time. Farmers, laborers, teachers, merchants, and institutional workers supported their families with constant effort, attention to budget, and gradual adaptation to the country's economic changes. Adventism appears in this scenario as a social witness, not as an exception, reflecting the same limitations, insecurities, and practical choices faced by the American population in general. Sustenance came from daily, repetitive, and often uncertain work, shaping a collective experience marked by simplicity, prudence, and silent coexistence with the transformations of a country under construction.